This video is going to be about how to make esters and the practical component. So as we know, carboxylic acid gets added to an alcohol to make an ester. We add in some sulfuric acid as a catalyst. They react, they produce the ester, but they also produce water as a byproduct because it's a condensation reaction. Now there are three main steps in the process. The first one is to reflux our components. We then isolate out the ester, we purify it, but first we're going to look at the equipment used in the process. So we tend to use the quick fit apparatus, which comes in a box, a very plain looking box that looks like this, but when you open it up it's got quite a few different parts to it. So this first one here is just a type of pipette. Now we are not probably going to be using that at all, because if we need a pipette we've got some better quality ones. This is called a separating funnel, so this is going to be used later on. This is a kind of like a T-junction joining. We'll use that later on as well. This is a spout, or if I can get it out. So this will be used for the distillation part, to collect out our materials. This is a stopper, also going to be used for the separating funnel. This is our pear-shaped flask. And of course the main part, the condenser. Now, of all those parts, really, what we're only going to use to start off with is the pear-shaped flask and the condenser, and obviously a Bunsen burner. So the other thing we're going to also be needing is some rubber tubing. But the other thing also to take into account is the fact that we have to set up near a gas tap, so that we can have access for our Bunsen burner, but also a sink. So at the moment, actually, I'm probably a little bit too far away from my sink to be able to do what I want to do. So I'm going to move that across. Now, my retort stand, I've already set it up. You're going to need two lots of boss heads and clamps, but I've set up the boss heads and clamps in a very particular way. So if we zoom in on here, the way I've set it up, I've made sure that this bar is on top of this little groove. Now what I mean by that is that if this accidentally loosened, it hasn't fallen out. Whereas if I do it the opposite way, so if I flip that around, and now have a look at it, and if I see how now this part is on top, if I accidentally loosen that, that has a chance of slipping or falling out. I'm not going to make it fall out completely, but this is definitely a lot more dangerous. And so what we want to make sure is that it's the other way around. Okay, so what I've done is I've already set up a retort stand and clamp with two lots of boss head and clamps. However, the first thing I need to do is get the sizing of, the positioning of where they are correct. Now to do that, we're going to take our pear-shaped flask. Now if you're not using your pear-shaped flask, the best thing to do is to put it into a beaker to sit on the desk so that it doesn't fall off. But while we're using it, we're going to take that. Now I haven't plugged my Bunsen burner in, but I'm just getting an idea of where it sits in relation to this. I'm going to tighten the clamp around the pear-shaped flask, because ideally you want your Bunsen burner to be lower than the pear-shaped flask. Now at this point, this is basically almost touching, and so this is not good enough, so I'm going to have to move this up. Now I've made sure that that's really tight when I'm doing that, and so that way I've got a little bit of distance. So remember, our flame's going to be about this big, so now it's in a good height above the Bunsen burner, and it's in there securely. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take my condenser. Now I've popped the hoses on for the condenser. It doesn't matter at this point which one's for which, but I'm going to then see how my hoses go. I'll just put them in the sink for now. The hoses are going to, the condenser is going to slot into the pear-shaped flask, and, well, actually that's pretty good. And I'm going to put a clamp around the top here. So the two places we want to put the clamp is where we're going to have points of weakness. Now the first point of weakness is around the pear-shaped flask here, and so that's why I've put one around the top of the pear-shaped flask. So rather than having it here where the pear-shaped flask could then fall out, we have it on the pear-shaped flask itself. And then the next one I'm going to put, I just need to loosen that up, move that around here, and I'm going to pop it around the top here. And so actually that's not too bad. The only issue now is that if we look at that a little bit more front on, that's not quite exactly straight, so I just need to straighten that up, because you don't really want it have it at an angle. And the way to straighten it up is just to rotate the clamps a little bit. So at the moment my clamp is going that way, so if I loosen my clamp and just rotate it around the stand a bit, I can get it in a nice straight line. Now with our hoses, there are two hoses, so one that goes down the bottom and one that goes out the top. With our hoses, we're going to connect one to the water and put one into the sink. Now it's very important that we do this in the correct order. The way to remember is that the water has to go against gravity. So if it's going against gravity, it's going up. And so we're going to connect the bottom hose into the tap. Might take a few goes to get it in there. And then the other hose we're going to put down the sink. And now a way to test that is that we can just turn on the water. And I don't know if you guys can see. Oh, there we go. So there's lots of bubbles coming out. So we've got the water flowing through, and also going down into the sink. Oh, here's the camera. There we go. However, I wouldn't want to leave my setup like this, because at the moment I haven't even got my chemicals into my pear-shaped flask. So I'm going to turn the water off. And just as a hint, if you need to do something and you need to get the water out, take the hose off of the tap first. And if you take it off of the tap, what you'll find is the water will start to run down into the sink. And it's a lot easier to get the water out without spilling it everywhere. So I'm just going to realign that. So I want to dismantle it just for a little bit, because I'm going to still need to get my contents into my pear-shaped flask. However, the other thing I haven't done is secured the joints. Now, while I've put the clamp in the right spot, I haven't put anything connecting the two pieces of glassware. So what we tend to do is that in between where we're going to have two pieces of glassware, we put grease or Vaseline. Now, because this was after school and I couldn't find the Vaseline or the grease, I had to improvise for this. I wouldn't do this for a real session, but instead I'm going to use pawpaw cream, because pawpaw cream is about 96% Vaseline anyway. So I'm going to take the pawpaw cream. I don't need a lot, just take a bit on my finger. And the idea is where that joint is, and it's normally this type of joint, so the one that looks kind of frosted over, and you just put the Vaseline around it, and you will start to see that it's turning a bit funny. Actually, I probably put a little bit too much, but that's all right. And so you've got the Vaseline on there, and that way when you put your pear-shaped flask back into that, it tends to stick just a little bit better. And it's less likely to fall out. It might still fall, obviously, but it just gives it a little bit of an extra secured nature. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend that I put my contents into my pear-shaped flask. We also put in our boiling chips, very, very important to put in the boiling chips. I'm going to put that back in, or I'll put it this way to secure at the weak point. I'm going to tighten this up. Now normally you'll have two people doing this, so it's a little bit easier. I've done this a lot, so it's a bit easier with just one person, but I still would like another person, because then I'll be sure that I'm not going to drop any of my equipment. There we go. And so this is really secure. We don't want it too tight, because obviously it can break. I'm just going to rotate around so you can see that a bit better. If I think that I'm ready to go, I'll check with my teacher first. I'm not ready to go because I also haven't put the hose back in for the water, so I'm going to put that back in. With our water flow, we're not looking for gushing water, but we're looking for enough water that it's flowing nice and freely. So I'll just turn the tap back on. And the idea is that the water is helping us control the temperature a little bit. The other thing helping to control the temperature, obviously, is our Bunsen burner. And so with our Bunsen burner, another benefit of having it set up like this is that we can easily control moving it away from the pear-shaped flask when we need to. So we'd be using blue flame, but we'd also be making sure our temperature isn't getting too high. Now, this is easier to see when it's actually happening, but you'll start to see vapors rising up. And if the vapors are boiling too much, that means that it's either too hot or your water isn't on enough. So water flow needs to be good, and also we need to be able to control this. So if you leave that all in one spot, it's likely to heat up one spot of the glassware and you could get a breakage. If it's too close, you might get a breakage. If it's too far away, it's not going to work very well. But this way you can heat up a little bit, move it away, move it back, and that way we get a bit more even heating. Because remember, it is a reversible reaction, and so we want to kind of keep that going. Okay, so once we've got the contents from our esterification, we need to filter out the stuff that we don't want. And so we're going to use this, which is a separating funnel. And so we'd have a little bit of a funnel thing here, and we'll pour our contents into here, or get rid of first our boiling chips, and then pour everything in here. And then we're going to add water to it. And when we add water, what we'll find is that we'll make 2 layers. Now, the purpose of the separating funnel is to be able to neutralize the acid, any acid left over, and then easily separate it out. So this is where our stopper comes in handy. Oh, the stopper doesn't even fit. So it must be from another kit, but we would have a stopper on there, and we could add in some bicarbonate to neutralize any acid in there, give it a shake, and the idea is this little bit here, this is called a stopcock. We can open and shut that to release liquids out, or release a certain amount of liquid out. The other thing we can do is, if we've added in a bicarb and we've added in an acid, we're going to create carbon dioxide. So what we'll do is we put our thumb on the imaginary stopper, we'll shake it up. That will create gas, which can create pressure. So we need to relieve that pressure by pointing it away from ourselves, pointing up so we don't lose any liquid, and then just opening it to relieve the pressure. And you'll hear that as a little bit of a burst, or a thing of air going out, and then you'll shut it again completely tight, and then you'll shake it up and do that again, and basically you'll keep doing that until no gas is produced. And the idea is then we can add in some more bicarbonate to make sure that we just neutralize everything. And once we've done all of that, we'll have our distinct 2 layers, and we want the organic layer. The ester is going to be in our organic layer, and so we'll separate them out by just emptying out into a beaker. Just emptying it out into a beaker, making sure that we try and keep the layers as separate as possible, and that way we can collect the 2, and then whatever the organic layer is, we can take that, and we're going to use that again in our distillation process, which is what I'm going to show you next. As you can see now, I've got 3 retort stands and clamps. I've left the clamps on from the first one. We're not going to need both of them, but the idea is we've got 2 others. So this is where it gets really helpful to have an extra person to help set this up. But the idea is we're going to want to put our condenser long ways this time. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to put in this way. I'm going to try and slide that in, or if that doesn't work, just take the hose off and then the hose back on. And I'm just going to tighten that a little bit around here. So as you can see, this time the clamp is actually the other way around. So instead of being open with this way, it's on an angle, and that's because we want to have the condenser that way. We're going to put in our T-junction, but as before, I'm going to put just a little bit of the Vaseline in, and I'm going to put it on that frosted bit where the joint is, and that's going to sit in here. Now that doesn't look amazing at this point, but if you can see, this is where our next weakness point is going to be, and so when we get our pear-shaped flask, we're going to want it to be here. So at the moment, my other clamp is way too low, so I'm going to take off the other clamp, but first I'm going to take that off so it doesn't fall. I'm going to take this one off and get rid of it, and I'm going to move this one a bit higher. So I'm going to put this, or if you don't want to put it in yet, you have someone else holding that here, and then the next person can move that up. So I want it to be kind of in line with that weakness point. This time you're probably going to use your pear-shaped flask as is, because you've got your contents from your ester pack, so that's going to slot in there. I didn't put the Vaseline, but you need to make sure to put the Vaseline when you do it. It's still not high enough, so I'm just going to put that a little bit higher. I'm going to tighten around. I'm just going to make sure that's That's quite secure, yeah. And that's secure there. Now normally this is where you would then put your other bit with the thermometer kind of in there, but of course we don't have that with this kit. Your kit will have it, and the thermometer is just important in order to make sure that you can control the temperature. Now this is most of the setup. The next bit we need to add is our little funnel bit at the end. Now that's going to go on the end here, and so that's why we need our third retort stand, because this is another weakness point. You don't technically need it, but it's more safe to use it. So again, the clamp is on the side, and the idea is that you're going to have to fiddle around a bit to get it in the right position. So I'm going to have to move this a bit higher, but also it's not quite. Oh wait, I tighten this on. Now as you'll find that when you tighten certain bits, it's going to make the whole apparatus move. This does not have to be super tight, so I've only tightened it a little bit, but the idea is it's holding it there, it's making it a little bit more secure. If I wanted to, I could make that more tight, but I'm a bit worried that this is not kind of sitting in a good position, so I just want to make sure that it won't come out. So at the moment all my equipment seems to be secure. Then what we're going to do is we're going to collect anything that comes out with a conical flask. I couldn't find a conical flask, so I'm going to use a beaker, and you would have that sitting down here or on here with a little bit of a stand to collect anything that comes out. Again, connecting the water, and remember that we're still going against gravity, so I'm still going to connect the bottom hose into the water. And so then with my Bunsen burner, which actually this might all be a bit too high. So after all of that, I've worked out that my setup is too high, and so this is with two people. You would very gently lower it down. I'm gonna do that by myself very carefully right now. Okay, so what I've done is I've now leveled it to a good height above the Bunsen burner. I could probably move that a little bit lower as well if I needed to. The other thing I've done is that, remember that this one wasn't sitting very well. I moved the clamp onto the other side, so I swapped that clamp, switched it around so that now this was in a better position. These clamps are pretty versatile, so you can take them off and put them around the other way if you find that you need to put it on the other side of the retort stand, as long as you've got that bit on the bottom. And so, oh actually, after all that, I might not be able to get this in, but that's not as big of an issue, because what I can do is I can always just rotate this retort stand round, or even just collect it out like this if needed. But the main thing is just being able to have it in there securely. And so with my temperature control, I would turn the water back on, make sure it's flowing nicely, make sure my Bunsen burner is ready to go, and then I would do my distillation. And I'll have to be very careful to watch the temperature to make sure that I get out the right amount of stuff. And then once I get that out, I can tell whether that's an ester or not, based on the smell, or even the weight, or the boiling point, and all that kind of stuff.